Hi, I'm Cassie. 3 years ago, my sister Victoria locked me out of my own wedding venue the night before my ceremony, while she slept in the bridal suite I'd paid for. She thought she'd destroyed my perfect day, but what she actually did was hand the FBI everything they needed to bring down $1 million scheme she never saw coming. Now she's facing federal charges, and I'm living the life she always claimed should have been hers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountain air in Asheville always smelled like possibility in October. That morning, driving up the winding road to Mountain View Estate, I should have been nervous about last-minute wedding details or worried about whether the flowers would arrive on time. Instead, I felt this strange calm, like everything in my life had finally aligned exactly where it was supposed to be. The venue sat perched on a ridge overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains, its stone facade glowing amber in the early sunlight. Dylan and I had chosen this place because it felt timeless, solid, the kind of place where promises meant something. I pulled into the circular driveway, gravel crunching under my tires, and saw Victoria's white BMW already parked near the entrance. My chest tightened slightly. She'd insisted on arriving early to help with decorations, though Victoria had never been the helpful type. More likely, she wanted to make sure everything met her standards, which were always impossibly high and conveniently different from whatever I'd planned. The estate's coordinator, Miss Apters Winters, greeted me at the carved wooden doors with a clipboard and a strained smile. She was a woman in her 60s who'd probably seen every kind of wedding drama imaginable, but something in her expression made me pause. "Cassie, dear," she said, her voice carefully measured, "we need to discuss a few changes your sister made to the arrangements." Changes? The word sent a chill down my spine despite the warm October morning. Victoria emerged from the main hall before I could ask what kind of changes. Her honey blonde hair perfectly styled even at 9 in the morning, wearing a cream-colored dress that somehow managed to look more bridal than my actual wedding dress hanging upstairs. "Cassie," she called out, arms spread wide as if she were hosting her own event. "I've been here since 7 making sure everything's absolutely perfect for you. You're going to love what I've done." Mrs. Winters shot me a look that said she'd tried to stop whatever Victoria had done and failed. I followed my sister into the main hall, where tomorrow I'd be walking down the aisle toward Dylan. The space was gorgeous, all exposed beams and stone walls, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mountains. But something felt off. The centerpieces were wrong. Instead of the simple white roses and eucalyptus Dylan and I had chosen, elaborate arrangements of deep red dahlias and black ribbon dominated each table. They were stunning, but they weren't ours. The altar area had been completely reconfigured too, with an ornate arch I'd never seen before, and fabric draping that looked more like a high-end fashion shoot than the intimate ceremony we'd planned. "Victoria," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, "these aren't the decorations we ordered." She waved a dismissive hand, her engagement ring catching the light. Trevor had proposed to her just 6 months after Dylan proposed to me, with a ring that was notably larger and more expensive. Pure coincidence. "I'm sure. The original plans were so boring, Cassie. So predictable. I called the florist this morning and upgraded everything. Don't worry about the cost, Daddy's covering the difference. He wants your day to be special." The florist had been working with Sarah at Mountain Blooms for months, carefully planning arrangements that would complement the venue's natural beauty without overwhelming it. We'd talked about the language of flowers, about how white roses symbolized new beginnings and eucalyptus represented protection. Victoria had swept all of that away and replaced it with her vision of what a proper wedding should look like. Mrs. Winters cleared her throat delicately. "There are also some adjustments to the accommodation arrangements we should review." My stomach dropped. Dylan and I had reserved the bridal suite and 3 guest rooms at the estate for the wedding party. It was part of what made this venue special, the ability to stay on the grounds and wake up married in the same place we'd set our vow. "I moved a few people around," Victoria said, examining her manicured nails. "The bridal suite has much better lighting for photos, so I'll be staying there tonight with Trevor. You and Dylan can take the smaller room at the end of the hall. It's actually more private." The smaller I'd seen it during our initial venue tour. It was barely larger than a closet, with a single window facing the parking lot instead of the mountains. More private was Victoria's way of saying less desirable. Victoria, the bridal suite is for the bride. It's literally called the bridal suite. She laughed, the sound light and musical but with an edge that made my teeth ache. Oh, Cassie, don't be so literal. Besides, Trevor and I are staying up late tonight to finish the wedding favor. You know how important it is that everything's perfect for your guests, wedding favors. We'd decided months ago to skip favors in favor of a donation to the local animal shelter. Dylan and I had agreed that our guests would prefer knowing we'd helped homeless pets rather than taking home another trinket they'd forget in a drawer. But apparently Victoria had other plans. Mrs. Winters spoke up quietly. Miss Brooks, I should mention that your sister also arranged for the photographer to do an engagement shoot this afternoon in the garden area. They'll need the space from 2 to 4, the garden area, where I'd planned to have my first look with Dylan, where we'd take our couple's photos before the ceremony. The stone garden with its climbing roses and mountain views was one of the main reasons we'd chosen this venue. I looked at Victoria, really looked at her, and saw something I'd been missing my whole life. The slight upturn of her lips wasn't excitement for my wedding day, it was satisfaction. She was enjoying every change, every override of my plans. Every small way she'd inserted herself into my wedding was giving her pleasure. When did you arrange all of this? I asked. Oh, I've been in touch with all your vendors for weeks now. They were so grateful to have someone taking charge. You've been so busy with work lately. I knew you needed help. Busy with work. I was a forensic accountant for a regional firm, and we'd been in the middle of a complex investigation involving shell companies and suspicious cash transactions. The case had been consuming my time, but I'd specifically scheduled lighter hours this month to focus on wedding planning. Victoria knew this, because I'd told her. I'd also specifically told her I didn't need help with the wedding because Dylan and I wanted to plan it ourselves. I need to make some phone calls, I said. Of course, I'll stay here and make sure everything continues to run smoothly. Mrs. Winters and I have become quite the team. Mrs. Winters looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. I walked outside to the stone terrace and dialed Sarah at Mountain Blooms. She answered on the second ring, her voice apologetic before I'd even identified myself. Cassie, I'm so sorry about this morning. Your sister was very insistent, and she said you'd authorize the change. She had your credit card information and everything. My credit card information. I'd given Victoria my card number weeks ago to pick up my dress from Final Alterations when I couldn't get away from work. A simple favor between sisters. Sarah, I never authorized any change. I love what we planned together. I was wondering about that. The new arrangements are beautiful, but they're not at all your style. Your sister seemed to know exactly what she wanted though. She even brought fabric samples to make sure the ribbon matched her dress. Her dress, of course. Victoria had chosen decorations that would complement what she was wearing, not what would look beautiful in our wedding photos. Is there any way to change things back? Sarah's silence stretched long enough that I knew the answer before she spoke. I'm afraid not, honey. I'd already started the original arrangements when she called, but she specifically requested that I donate those to the women's shelter instead, which was lovely of course, but it means I don't have the flowers anymore, and the new arrangements took all my available dahlias for the week. Donated to the women's shelter. Victoria had managed to make herself look generous while destroying what Dylan and I actually wanted. It was masterful in its calculation. I called the photographer next. Marcus had been recommended by 3 different couples, and his portfolio showed exactly the kind of natural, candid style Dylan and I loved. He answered between shots, background noise, suggesting he was already at another event. Hey Cassie, looking forward to tomorrow. Your sister mentioned you wanted to add an engagement session this afternoon. Smart thinking, having backup shots in case tomorrow's weather doesn't cooperate. Marcus, I didn't request an engagement session. More background noise. Then his voice became more focused. Oh, well, your sister called yesterday and said you'd discussed it but forgot to mention it to me. She seemed to know all the details about your package and timeline. All the details, because I'd shared them with her. Excited to have family involved in our planning process. Every vendor, every timeline, every decision Dylan and I had made together. Who's the engagement session for? Your sister and her fiancé. She said you wanted them to have professional photos, since they'd been so helpful with wedding planning. Really sweet of you, actually. Not many brides think to do something like that. I closed my eyes and listened to the mountain breeze rustling through the oak trees. Victoria had booked our photographer on our wedding weekend at our venue for her own photo session. She'd positioned it as my gift to her, making me look generous while ensuring that her photos would be taken in the exact location. Dylan and I had planned to capture our first married moments. Marcus, I need you to cancel that session. I can't do that, Cassie. It's less than 24 hours before your wedding. If I cancel on another client now, especially when your sister already confirmed all the details, it would be really unprofessional. Plus she already paid the additional fee. From my credit card, no doubt. I hung up and sat on the stone wall overlooking the valley. The leaves were just starting to turn, patches of gold and red scattered among the green like nature's confetti. Tomorrow was supposed to be the most important day of my life, and my sister had systematically taken control of every detail. Not to help me but to make it hers. My phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. Can't wait to marry you tomorrow. Whatever Victoria's planning, just remember it's our day, not hers. Dylan knew. He'd probably known before I did. We'd been together for 4 years, and he'd watched Victoria operate at family dinners and holidays. He'd seen the way she redirected conversations to herself, the way she managed to make other people's achievements about her own struggles or success, but he'd never said anything directly because he knew I wasn't ready to hear it. I typed back, she's taken over everything. Flowers, photos, rooms. I don't know how to fix it without looking like a bridezilla. His response came immediately, you're not responsible for fixing her behavior. We're still getting married tomorrow, and that's what matters. He was right, but it didn't ease the knot in my stomach. Victoria hadn't just changed decorations or rearranged schedules. She'd taken my wedding and made it hers, piece by piece, using my own trust and resources to do it. And she'd done it in a way that made me look petty for objecting. After all, she was just trying to help. She was just making things more beautiful. She was just being generous with Daddy's money. I walked back inside to find Victoria directing Mrs. Winters on lighting adjustments. She'd changed into a different outfit, this one more explicitly wedding adjacent, and had somehow acquired a clipboard of her own. There you are, she said brightly. I was just explaining to Mrs. Winters how we need to adjust the ceremony time. Since the photographer needs the garden area this afternoon, and tomorrow's timeline is so tight, I thought we could move your ceremony up by an hour. That way there's more time for cocktails before dinner, an hour earlier, which would conflict with hair and makeup appointments, throw off the timeline we'd shared with all our guests, and ensure that half our wedding party would be scrambling to get ready on time. Victoria, we can't change the ceremony time the day before the wedding. Of course we can. Miss Winters said it's no problem at all, didn't you? Mrs. Winters looked trapped between two sisters, one of whom was clearly used to getting her way, and the other of whom was technically the client, but seemed to have less decision-making power. Well, Mrs. Winters said carefully, it would be highly unusual, but if everyone's in agreement. We're not in agreement, I said firmly. The ceremony time stays as planned. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. You know what? You're absolutely right. I was just trying to optimize everything, but it's your day. We'll make the original timeline work. She said it like she was graciously conceding something, rather than acknowledging that she'd been trying to change plans that weren't hers to change. But I recognized the tone. It was the same one she'd used when we were kids, and she'd take my Halloween candy for safekeeping, then act like she was doing me a favor by giving some of it back. Miss Winters excused herself to check on catering arrangements, leaving Victoria and me alone in the hall that tomorrow would be filled with our friends and family. Victoria perched on the edge of a table, her posture casual but her eyes calculating. Cassie, can we talk honestly for a minute? I braced myself. Victoria's version of honest conversation usually involved her explaining why her way was better while making it sound like helpful advice. I'm worried about you, she continued. You've been so stressed about this wedding, and I can see how it's affecting you. The way you just snapped at Mrs. Winters, the phone calls outside. This isn't like you, I hadn't snapped at Mrs. Winters. I'd stated my preference for my own wedding timeline, but Victoria had a gift for reframing other people's reasonable responses as overreactions. "I'm fine, Victoria. I'm just trying to make sure my wedding happens the way Dylan and I planned it." "But that's exactly what I mean. You're so focused on having everything perfect that you're missing the bigger picture. A wedding isn't about flower arrangements or photo schedule. It's about celebrating love, bringing families together, creating memories that will last forever." She was right, of course. That's what made her manipulation so effective. She could take something true and use it to justify whatever she wanted to do. "You're absolutely right," I said. "It is about celebrating love and bringing families together. That's why I'd like my family to respect the choices Dylan and I made for our celebration." Victoria laughed, that same musical sound with its sharp undertone. "Oh, Cass, sometimes I think you forget that this wedding isn't just about you and Dylan. It's about all of us. Mom and Dad are paying for most of it. All our relatives are traveling here. Everyone's taking time off work and buying new outfits." When you put it in perspective, making sure the flowers and photos are absolutely perfect is really about honoring everyone who's investing in your happiness. She'd managed to make my wedding about obligation to other people rather than celebration of Dylan's and my commitment to each other. And she'd positioned herself as the person making sure I didn't disappoint everyone who'd invested in us. "I appreciate everyone's investment," I said carefully. "But Dylan and I would prefer to honor it by having the wedding we actually want." "Well, of course, sweetie, but you know how Mom gets when things aren't elegant enough. And Aunt Carolyn is flying in from Chicago specifically for this. We just want to make sure everything reflects well on the family." The family, Victoria's ultimate trump card. Not my happiness, not Dylan's and my preferences, but how our choices would reflect on the Brooks family reputation. She'd learned this move from our mother, who'd been wielding family obligation like a weapon for as long as I could remember. I looked around the hall again, at the red flowers I hadn't chosen, and the fabric draping I'd never seen before. Tomorrow, every photo would show Victoria's vision of what my wedding should look like, not mine. Years from now, when Dylan and I looked back at our wedding album, we'd see her taste, her decisions, her idea of elegance. "I need to check on the bridal suite," I said. "Oh, about that. I hope you don't mind, but I moved some of your things to the smaller room already. I wanted to make sure Trevor and I had enough space for all our wedding weekend luggage. You know how he overpacks." She'd moved my thing without asking, without permission, without even telling me until after it was done. I walked upstairs, Victoria trailing behind, still chattering about timeline optimizations and family expectations. The bridal suite was everything I'd imagined for my wedding. A king-size bed with white linens and mountain views, a sitting area with a fireplace, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub and separate shower. Victoria's clothes were hanging in the closet, her makeup spread across the vanity, Trevor's golf clubs leaning against the wall by the window. They'd made themselves at home in the space Dylan and I had specifically reserved for our first night as a married couple. "Where are my things?" I asked. I had Mrs. Winters move them to the blue room. It's really quite cozy once you get used to the size. The blue room was at the end of the hall, barely large enough for its double bed and single dresser. The window faced the parking lot, and the walls were thin enough that you could hear every car door slam and every conversation in the hallway. It was the kind of room you'd put someone in when you wanted them to know they weren't important enough for anything better. My wedding dress was hanging on the back of the door, looking somehow diminished in the small space. My shoes were lined up on the narrow windowsill, and my jewelry box sat on the dresser next to a small bouquet of gas station flowers. Victoria had apparently bought as a gesture of goodwill. "It's not so bad," Victoria said from the doorway, "and you'll barely be here anyway. You'll be so busy tomorrow with photos and ceremony and reception." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Really? You'll probably only sleep here for a few hours." A few hours. My wedding night, reduced to a few hours of sleep in a room that felt like an afterthought. She was right that we'd be busy tomorrow, but she was missing the point entirely. Or maybe she wasn't missing it at all. Maybe she understood exactly what she was taking from me, and just didn't care. "Victoria, I want the bridal suite. Oh, Cassie. Don't be silly. Trevor and I are all settled in, and it would be such a hassle to move everything again. Besides, you and Dylan are so easygoing. I knew you wouldn't mind making this tiny sacrifice for family. Tiny sacrifice. She'd taken the most expensive room in the venue, the one with symbolic meaning for my wedding weekend, and called it a tiny sacrifice. Like I was being unreasonable for wanting what I'd paid for. It's not about being easygoing, I said. It's about having the room we reserved for our wedding night. But you could have your wedding night anywhere. It's not about the room, it's about being together. Sometimes I think you get too caught up in material things, instead of focusing on what really matters. Material things. She'd transformed my desire to sleep in the room I'd specifically chosen and paid for into shallow materialism. She had a gift for making her selfishness look like my character flaw. I sat on the narrow bed and looked out at the parking lot. In a few hours, our wedding party would arrive for the rehearsal dinner. Dylan would see the changed flowers and ask what happened. Our friends would notice that the photos they'd expected to take in the garden would have to wait, because Victoria was using the space for her own engagement session. Everyone would be too polite to say anything, but they'd all understand that somehow my sister had taken over my wedding. And tomorrow, when Dylan and I woke up married, we'd be waking up in a cramped room overlooking asphalt instead of mountains, because Victoria had decided she deserved better accommodations than the bride. You know what, you're right, I said finally. It's not about the room. Victoria beamed, thinking she'd won. I knew you'd understand. You're always so reasonable, Cassie. That's what I've always admired about you. She left me alone in the blue room with my displaced belongings, and my growing realization that this was who my sister had always been. I'd just been too hopeful, too trusting, too invested in the idea of family loyalty to see it clearly. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my recent calls. At the very bottom of the list was a number I hadn't dialed in weeks. Agent Lisa Chen, the FBI financial crimes investigator who'd been consulting on our firm's biggest case. The case involving suspicious wedding vendor transactions and cash payments that didn't match reported income. The case that Victoria's boyfriend Trevor had somehow known details about during our last family dinner, even though those details weren't public information. The case that had suddenly become much more interesting now that I was seeing exactly how creative my sister could be with other people's money and resources. I stared at Agent Chen's number for a long time, listening to Victoria's laughter echoing down the hallway as she directed me. Winters on more last-minute changes. Tomorrow was my wedding day, but tonight, I was going to make sure it was also the beginning of something my sister would never see coming. I smiled as I pressed dial. Agent Chen answered on the third ring, her voice professional but warm. I could hear keyboard clicking in the background, the sound of someone who worked late into the evening on cases that mattered. Cassie, this is unexpected. Everything all right? I looked around the cramped blue room that was supposed to be my wedding sanctuary and almost laughed at the question. Nothing was all right, but maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. Agent Chen, I think I have information relevant to the Mountain View investigation. The keyboard clicking stopped. What kind of information? I took a deep breath and told her about Trevor's knowledge of case details that weren't public, about Victoria's sudden ability to make expensive changes to wedding arrangements without any visible source of income, about the credit card authorizations and vendor relationships that had appeared overnight. As I spoke, I could hear Agent Chen taking notes, her questions becoming sharper and more focused. Cassie, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Has your sister ever mentioned specific wedding vendors to you? Names, locations, payment structures? My stomach dropped. She's been in contact with all my vendors for weeks. She said she was helping coordinate. What vendors specific? I rattled off the list: Mountain Blooms, Marcus Photography, Asheville Catering Company, Blue Ridge Rentals, even the string quartet we'd hired for the ceremony. Victoria had inserted herself into every single vendor relationship, claiming to be my representative, making changes and authorizations in my name. Cassie, We've been investigating irregularities in wedding vendor income reporting in the Asheville area. Cash payments that don't match reported earnings. Vendor relationships that seem designed to obscure money movement rather than provide services. Your sister's boyfriend works in financial management, correct? Trevor's a wealth advisor. He handles investment portfolios for high net worth clients. Agent Chen was quiet for a moment. We've been wondering how someone would identify which vendors to approach for this kind of arrangement. Having a family member planning a wedding would provide perfect cover for vendor research and relationship building. The pieces clicked together like a lock opening. Victoria hadn't taken over my wedding to hurt me or even to steal my spotlight. She'd taken over my wedding to use it as a front for financial crimes. Every vendor contact, every payment authorization, every change she'd made had been building a network that Trevor could use to move money without detection. Agent Chen, what do I do? My wedding is tomorrow. You proceed exactly as planned. If we're right about this, your wedding is now evidence. We need to document everything your sister does, every payment she makes, every vendor interaction. Can you do that without raising suspicion? Could I smile and play along while my sister used my wedding as a criminal enterprise? Could I watch her take over the most important day of my life while secretly gathering evidence to bring her down? I thought about the bridal suite, about Victoria's smug satisfaction, as she moved my belongings to make room for Trevor's golf clubs. I thought about the red flowers that would be in every wedding photo, chosen not for beauty but for whatever financial scheme they support. I thought about tomorrow night, when Dylan and I would start our married life in a cramped room overlooking a parking lot because my sister had decided she deserved better. Yes, I said. I can do that. Good. I'm going to send you some numbers to call if you observe anything unusual. And Cassie? Don't let on that anything's changed. Act frustrated about the wedding changes, but don't give any indication that you suspect a larger issue. Act frustrated. That wouldn't be difficult. After I hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of the blue room and felt something shift inside me. For weeks I'd been trying to understand why Victoria was behaving this way, assuming there was some family dynamic I was missing, or some way I could fix our relationship. Now I understood that there was nothing to fix because there had never been a real relationship to begin with. Victoria had been using me and our family for years. I'd just been too naive to see it. My phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. Rehearsal dinner in an hour. You okay? You've been quiet. I typed back. Victoria moved us to a different room, and changed all the flowers, and booked the photographer for her own session. But I'm handling it. Want me to talk to her? No, I've got this. For the first time all day that felt true. The rehearsal dinner was held in the estate's smaller dining room, a cozy space with exposed stone walls and candlelit tables that should have felt intimate and romantic. Instead, it felt like a performance where I didn't know my line. Victoria had positioned herself as the unofficial hostess, greeting guests as they arrived, directing seating arrangements, and making toasts that somehow managed to be about her own relationship as much as mine and Dylan. Cassie and Dylan are so lucky to have found each other, she announced, raising her champagne glass. And Trevor and I are so grateful to be able to share this special time as we plan our own journey toward marriage. Our relatives murmured appreciation, and several people turned to ask Trevor and Victoria about their wedding plan. Within minutes, the conversation had shifted from celebrating Dylan and me to hearing about Victoria's ideas for a destination wedding in Italy, her thoughts on engagement ring styles, and her philosophy on marriage as a partnership between equals who lift each other up. Dylan squeezed my hand under the table. His jaw was tight, but he kept his expression neutral. We'd talked about this dynamic before, the way Victoria could redirect any family gathering to focus on herself, but we'd never had to sit through it at our own rehearsal dinner. Tell them about the flowers tomorrow, Victoria said, suddenly turning attention back to me. Cassie was so sweet to let me upgrade the arrangements. The original plan was lovely, but I thought we could make it even more special. Let me upgrade, as if I'd had any choice in the matter. But I smiled and nodded, playing my part in whatever performance Victoria needed from me. Victoria has excellent taste, I said. I'm sure they'll be beautiful. And wait until you see the photos from this afternoon. Marcus captured some gorgeous shots of Trevor and me and the garden. They'll be perfect for our engagement announcement. Our photographer, our venue, our wedding weekend, all converted into props for Victoria's social media presence. But instead of feeling angry, I felt calm, because now I knew what she was really doing, and why, and what was going to happen next. After dinner, as guests mingled over coffee and dessert, I excused myself to use the restroom and overheard Victoria talking quietly with Trevor near the stone fireplace. They thought they were being private, but voices carry in those old buildings, and I'd always been good at listening when people assumed I couldn't hear. "Everything's set for tomorrow," Victoria was saying. "The florist confirmed the cash payment arrangement, and the photographers already processed the additional fees. By Monday we'll have established relationships with 6 different vendors, who understand our payment preferences." Payment preferences, that was one way to describe money laundering. "Good work, babe," Trevor replied. "Having Cassie's wedding as the introduction makes everything look legitimate. No one questions payments made for family celebrations." Family celebrations. My wedding had been reduced to cover for their criminal enterprise. I walked back to the dining room with a smile on my face, and spent the rest of the evening playing the role of grateful bride, whose sister was just trying to help make everything perfect. I thanked Victoria for her thoughtfulness, complimented her dress, and even suggested that maybe she and Trevor should have their engagement photos taken at some of the same locations. "Dylan and I would be using tomorrow." "That's so sweet of you to offer," Victoria said, her eyes lighting up. "We'd love that. Maybe Marcus could do a few shots of all 4 of us together." All 4 of us together. Perfect documentation of the family relationships that made this whole scheme possible. As the evening wound down and guests began heading to their hotels, Victoria pulled me aside for what looked like a sisterly heart-to-heart, but felt more like a final briefing. "I know today was a lot of changes," she said, "but I really think everything's going to be even more beautiful than what you originally planned. Sometimes we get so focused on our own vision that we miss opportunities for something better." Something better, like using my wedding as a front for financial crimes. "I'm sure you're right," I said. "Thank you for taking care of everything. That's what sisters are for. And Cassie, I hope you know how much it means to me that you trust me enough to let me help with your special day. Not everyone would be secure enough to share control like this." Share control. She'd completely taken over my wedding and was now framing my lack of resistance as emotional maturity. It was masterful manipulation, and if I hadn't known what was really happening, I might have actually felt guilty for being upset about the changes. "I'm just grateful to have family who cares enough to get involved," I said. Victoria beamed and hugged me, the kind of hug that looks warm and sisterly to observers, but feels calculating to the person being hugged. Over her shoulder I saw Dylan watching us with concern, and I gave him a small nod to let him know I was okay. That night, lying in the narrow bed in the blue room, while Dylan stayed at his groomsman's hotel as tradition required, I stared at the ceiling and listened to sounds from the bridal suite down the hall. Victoria and Trevor were having their own private celebration, complete with champagne and loud conversation about tomorrow's opportunity. Every laugh felt like a reminder that they were sleeping in the room I'd chosen for my wedding night, using my special weekend to advance their criminal plans. But instead of feeling defeated, I felt energized. Because for the first time in my relationship with Victoria, I knew exactly what was happening, and exactly what I was going to do about it. She thought she was using me, but actually she was handing me everything I needed to destroy her. I pulled out my laptop and began documenting everything I could remember, every vendor conversation, every payment authorization, every detail Victoria had shared about her coordination effort. I created timestamps, saved screenshots of her social media posts about the wedding preparations, and compiled a folder of evidence that would complement whatever Agent Chen's team was already building. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Agent Chen. If you observe any cash transactions tomorrow, note amounts, vendors and times. Stay safe and act normal. Act normal." Tomorrow I would smile through my wedding ceremony surrounded by flowers I hadn't chosen, in a venue my sister had redesigned, with photography that would include her engagement shots alongside my bridal portrait. I would smile while my sister used my marriage as cover for money laundering, while she slept in my bridal suite, while she positioned herself as the helpful sister who'd made everything more beautiful. But I would also be gathering evidence that would bring down her entire operation. At some point during the night, I must have fallen asleep, because I woke to sunlight streaming through the small window and the sound of catering trucks arriving in the parking lot below. My wedding day had arrived, and Victoria had no idea it would also be the day her criminal enterprise began to unravel. I showered in the tiny bathroom and put on the silk robe I'd bought specifically for getting ready photos. In a few hours, my hair and makeup team would arrive, and I'd transform into a bride. But first, I had evidence to gather. I knocked on the door of the bridal suite, and Victoria answered wearing a hotel robe that somehow looked more luxurious than my silk one. "Good morning, beautiful bride," she said. "Ready for your big day? I'm so excited. And Victoria, I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done. Can you walk me through the timeline one more time? I want to make sure I understand all the change." She invited me into the suite, where Trevor was drinking coffee and scrolling through his phone. The room looked like they'd been living there for weeks rather than one night, with clothes and papers spread across every surface. On the desk by the window, I noticed a notebook with vendor names and dollar amounts written in Trevor's handwriting. Victoria pulled out her phone and began detailing the schedule she'd created. "Marcus arrives at 10 for prep photos, then your hair and makeup team at 11. But before any of that, the florist is delivering the arrangements at 9. And I need to be here to make sure they understand the payment structure." Payment structure. Not payment amount or delivery logistics, but payment structure. "What kind of payment structure?" I asked, pulling out my own phone as if I was taking notes about the timeline. "Oh, just some adjustments to how the final payment gets processed. Nothing you need to worry about, but I promised I'd handle the financial coordination, so you can focus on being a bride." I activated my phone's voice recording app and continued asking innocent questions about vendor coordination and payment logistics. Victoria was happy to explain how she'd arranged for all final payments to be made in cash for simplicity, how she'd coordinated with each vendor to ensure they understood the family's preferences for discrete transactions, and how grateful everyone was to have someone taking charge of the business side of the wedding. My wedding had become a business operation, with Victoria as the CEO and my celebration as the product being sold. At 9 o'clock sharp, Sarah from Mountain Blooms arrived with the arrangements Victoria had ordered. They were undeniably gorgeous, deep red dahlias, and black ribbon that would photograph beautifully and make every image look dramatic and elegant. But watching Victoria handle the payment was like watching a different person emerge. "Sarah, you have the envelope we discussed." Sarah looked uncomfortable but nodded, pulling a thick manila envelope from her delivery bag. "Miss Brooks, I have to say again that this is highly unusual. Most brides prefer to handle payments through normal channels." "I understand, but as I explained, the family prefers to handle wedding expenses this way for tax purposes. You'll find the full amount plus the tip we discussed. Tax purpose." Victoria was coaching vendors to participate in what was obviously a money laundering scheme by making it sound like legitimate tax planning. Sarah counted the cash, clearly uncomfortable with the entire transaction, but ultimately accepting the payment and leaving quickly. As soon as Sarah left, Victoria turned to Trevor with a satisfied smile. "That's vendor number 3 confirmed for the new payment structure. By the end of today, we'll have established relationships with everyone we need. My wedding vendors were being recruited into a criminal network, using my celebration as the introduction and my family's reputation as the credibility." Trevor looked up from his notebook. "The catering company is next. They're expecting the cash payment for final services, and they've agreed to the ongoing arrangement for future events." Future events. This wasn't just about my wedding. Victoria and Trevor were building a vendor network they could use for ongoing money laundering operations, with each business relationship starting with a seemingly legitimate family celebration. I excused myself to get ready for hair and makeup, but not before taking several photos of Trevor's notebook and recording more of their conversation about payment coordination and vendor relationship management. By the time I left the bridal suite, I had enough evidence to complement whatever Agent Chen's team was building. My hair and makeup artist Jenny arrived right on schedule and immediately commented on the changed flower. "These are gorgeous, but they're so different from what you showed me in your inspiration photos. Did you decide to go with a more dramatic look?" "My sister made some upgrades," I said, settling into the chair Jenny had set up by the window. "Well, she has excellent taste." These colors will be stunning in photos. As Jenny worked on my makeup, Victoria flitted in and out of the room, ostensibly checking on my progress, but actually coordinating with more vendors. I heard her on the phone with the catering company, the rental company, and even the string quartet. Each conversation focused on payment logistics rather than service details. Yes, the family prefers cash transactions for privacy reasons, she said during one call. We'll have the full amount ready when you arrive for setup, privacy reasons. Another way to make money laundering sound like legitimate wealthy family behavior. By noon, I was fully ready, my dress fitted perfectly and my makeup flawless. Despite the stress of the morning, I looked like a bride and more importantly, I felt like one, not because of the external preparations, but because I was about to marry Dylan and also because I was about to watch my sister's criminal enterprise collapse around her. Dylan arrived for our first look photos, and seeing his face when he turned around made everything else fade into background noise. He looked stunned, then emotional, then purely happy in a way that reminded me why none of Victoria's scheming actually mattered. We were getting married today, and that was the only thing that truly counted. You're beautiful, he said simply, and I believed him. Marcus photographed our first look against the mountain backdrop. Victoria hadn't been able to change, and for a few minutes, I forgot about evidence gathering and money laundering and just focused on marrying the man I love. But when we moved to the garden area for couples portraits, reality reasserted itself. The space had been transformed with additional decorations that definitely hadn't been in the original budget. Elaborate fabric draping, additional lighting equipment, and flower arrangements that looked more like a magazine shoot than a wedding ceremony. Victoria had spent enormous amounts of money, making my wedding look like something from a luxury publication, and I was beginning to understand that the money hadn't come from our family's legitimate resources. Victoria really went all out, Dylan said quietly as Marcus positioned us for photos. She certainly did, I agreed, making sure my voice carried to where Victoria was supervising the setup team. As the afternoon progressed, I watched Victoria orchestrate what looked like wedding coordination but was actually criminal enterprise management. Every vendor interaction involved cash payments, every service agreement included arrangements for future events, and every conversation Victoria had was carefully structured to make the unusual payment methods sound like normal wealthy family preference. By the time guests began arriving for the ceremony, Victoria had successfully used my wedding to establish money laundering relationships with 6 different vendors, processed thousands of dollars in cash payments that would be difficult to trace, and created a network of business relationships that Trevor could use for ongoing financial crimes. She'd also completely taken over my wedding day, sleeping in my bridal suite, choosing my flowers, redirecting my photographer's attention, and positioning herself as the person who'd made everything beautiful and successful. But as I walked down the aisle toward Dylan, surrounded by the red flowers I hadn't chosen, and the decorations I hadn't planned, I smiled genuinely for the first time all day, because in a few hours, Agent Chen would have everything she needed to bring down Victoria's operation. And tonight, when Victoria was celebrating her successful criminal debut, FBI agents would be preparing warrants that would destroy everything she thought she'd built. My sister had used my wedding to launch her criminal career, but she'd also used my wedding to hand law enforcement everything they needed to end it. The ceremony itself was beautiful despite everything Victoria had changed. Dylan and I said our vows surrounded by our friends and family, and when the officiant pronounced us married, nothing else mattered except the fact that we'd committed our lives to each other. Victoria could steal decorations, and steal rooms and steal vendor relationships, but she couldn't steal the actual meaning of the day. During the cocktail hour, while guests enjoyed drinks and hors d'oeuvres, I watched Victoria work the crowd like a professional networking event. She introduced herself to vendors as the wedding coordinator, collected business cards and scheduled follow-up meetings for future events that would never happen. Trevor circulated among our relatives, charming them with stories about his investment expertise and offering to help with their financial planning needs. They were using my wedding reception to expand their criminal network, recruiting both vendors and potential clients, while everyone assumed they were just being friendly and helpful family members. During dinner, Victoria stood to make a toast that was supposedly about Dylan and me, but was actually about her own relationship and future plans. She talked about the importance of family support during major life transitions, the value of having people who understand business and financial planning, and how grateful she was to be part of a family that appreciated quality and attention to detail. Quality and attention to detail. She was describing money laundering as if it were event planning expertise. As the evening progressed and our guests began to leave, Victoria pulled me aside for what I assumed would be a final sisterly moment, but turned out to be something much more calculating. "Cassie, I hope you've seen today how much more beautiful everything became when we elevated your original plans. I'd love to help you with future events too, anniversary parties, maybe a baby shower someday. I've learned so much about vendor coordination and payment logistics. She wanted to use my life occasions as ongoing cover for criminal activities. That's so thoughtful of you to offer, I said. I'll definitely keep that in mind. And if any of your friends are planning weddings or events, I'd be happy to share what I've learned. I've built such good relationships with all these vendors now." There it was. Victoria wanted me to help her recruit new clients for her money laundering operation, using my friendships and professional relationships as the introduction. "I'll be sure to mention that if anyone asks." Victoria hugged me again, that same calculating embrace from the night before, and whispered, "I'm so proud of how today turned out. We make a good team, don't we?" A good team. She thought I was now part of her criminal enterprise, either knowingly or unknowingly. She thought she'd successfully used my wedding to launch her new business venture and recruit me as an ongoing accomplice. She had no idea that she'd actually provided law enforcement with everything they needed to destroy her. Later that night, as Dylan and I finally retreated to the cramped blue room that Victoria had assigned us, I lay awake listening to her celebration in the bridal suite and thinking about everything that would change in the next few days. Victoria thought she'd pulled off the perfect crime, using family relationships and social expectations to create an untraceable money laundering operation. But she'd also documented every aspect of her crimes, involved multiple witnesses, and created a paper trail that would be impossible to defend against. Most importantly, she'd underestimated her sister. Tomorrow, Victoria would wake up thinking she was a criminal mastermind who'd used her family to build a successful illegal business. By next week, she'd be facing federal charges and trying to explain to a judge why she'd used her sister's wedding to commit financial crime. I smiled into the darkness and finally fell asleep, knowing that my sister's criminal career would be even shorter than her time in my bridal suite. The honeymoon in Charleston was supposed to last a week, but Dylan and I came home after 3 days. Not because we weren't enjoying ourselves, but because I couldn't stop thinking about what Victoria was doing while we were gone. Agent Chen had texted me twice with updates about the investigation's progress, and each message made it harder to pretend I was just a newlywed enjoying coastal walks and romantic dinners. "She's moving fast," Agent Chen had written. 3 new vendor contacts since Sunday, all using the same payment structure your wedding established. Victoria wasn't wasting time. She'd used my wedding as a proof of concept, and now she was scaling up the operation before anyone could notice patterns or ask questions. By the time Dylan and I returned to our apartment in Charlotte, she'd already scheduled consultation meetings with 2 other brides and arranged follow-up services with all the vendors from our wedding. Dylan understood without me having to explain much. He'd watched Victoria operate for years, and he'd seen enough during our wedding weekend to know that something bigger was happening. When I told him about the FBI investigation, his first question wasn't about the danger or the family drama, it was about how he could help. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, unpacking our suitcase while I spread Agent Chen's contact information across our kitchen table. "Just be normal. We can't let Victoria suspect that anything's changed. As far as she knows, we're grateful for everything she did, and completely oblivious to anything beyond wedding planning. That shouldn't be hard. I've been pretending not to notice Victoria's manipulation for 4 years." He said it without bitterness, just factual observation. Dylan had excellent instincts about people, and he'd recognized Victoria's true nature long before I was ready to see it. But he'd never pushed me to confront her because he knew I needed to reach that understanding on my own. Agent Chen called that evening while Dylan was making dinner, and I was supposedly sorting through wedding gifts. In reality, I was organizing the evidence I'd gathered over the weekend and preparing for whatever came next. Cassie, we've been monitoring your sister's activities since Monday. She's contacted 7 different wedding vendors in the Charlotte and Asheville areas, all using your wedding as a reference point. Each conversation follows the same pattern, establishing credibility through your family connection, discussing payment preferences that favor cash transactions, and scheduling ongoing services that would provide cover for regular money movement. 7 vendors in 3 days. Victoria was building her network faster than anyone had anticipated. What happens next? I asked. We need more evidence of the money source. Your wedding documented the laundering mechanism, but we need to prove where the dirty money is coming from. That's where it gets more complicated. Complicated how? Agent Chen paused, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. We think the money is coming through Trevor's investment management business. He handles portfolios for several clients who have questionable income sources, and we suspect he's been using their investments to generate cash that needs to be cleaned before it can be used legitimately. Investment management. Trevor's legitimate business was providing cover for money laundering, with his clients' questionable investments generating cash that needed to be processed through seemingly normal transactions. Wedding vendors were perfect for this, because they regularly handled large cash payments, and their income was naturally irregular. So Victoria isn't just helping with money laundering, she's essential to the operation. Exactly. Trevor can generate the dirty cash, but he needs a way to move it through legitimate businesses without raising suspicion. Wedding planning provides perfect cover because it involves multiple vendors, large irregular payments, and family relationships that explain unusual coordination. Family relationships. Victoria had turned our family connection into the foundation of a criminal enterprise, using my trust and our parents' social standing to provide credibility for illegal financial transactions. What do you need from me? We need documentation of Trevor's client relationships and evidence of the connection between his investment business and the cash payments your sister is coordinating. Can you get access to information about his business operations? Could I get access to Trevor's business information? I was a forensic accountant who specialized in tracing suspicious financial transactions, and Victoria still trusted me completely. She had no idea I suspected anything beyond normal wedding stress, and she was eager to involve me in her expanding operation. I think so. Victoria wants me to help her recruit more clients. She's planning to use my professional network to find brides who might want her coordination services. Perfect. If she's trying to recruit you as a business partner, she'll need to share details about how the operation works. Document everything you can, but be careful not to push too hard or ask questions that would make her suspicious. After I hung up, Dylan and I sat at our kitchen table eating pasta and discussing how our honeymoon period had turned into an undercover operation. It felt surreal, talking about evidence gathering and criminal investigations, while surrounded by wedding gifts and congratulations cards from our friends and family. Are you okay with this? Dylan asked. I mean, I know Victoria's been awful to you, but this is still your sister we're talking about. If she gets arrested, it's going to destroy your family. I considered his question seriously. Was I okay with potentially sending my sister to federal prison? Was I okay with destroying our family's reputation, and probably ending my relationship with our parents? Dylan, she used our wedding to commit crimes. She didn't just steal my flowers or take my room, she turned our marriage into cover for money laundering. She involved me in federal crimes without my knowledge or consent. I know. I just want to make sure you're prepared for how this ends. How this ends? Victoria would be arrested, charged with financial crimes, and probably sentenced to years in federal prison. Our parents would be humiliated and angry, likely blaming me for cooperating with law enforcement instead of handling the situation within the family. Our extended relatives would take sides, and family gatherings would become impossible. But the alternative was letting Victoria continue using our family as cover for criminal activities, potentially implicating me and our parents in ongoing illegal operations. She'd already demonstrated that she had no boundaries when it came to using family relationships for her own benefit. If I didn't stop her now, she'd continue escalating until we were all criminally liable for her choices. I'm prepared, I said. The next morning, Victoria called while I was getting ready for work. Her voice was bright and energetic, the tone she used when she was excited about a new project. Cassie, I've been thinking about our conversation at the wedding, about helping your friends with their event planning needs. I'd love to take you to lunch this week and talk about how we could work together. Work together. She wanted to formalize our partnership in her criminal enterprise. That sounds great, Victoria. I'd love to hear more about what you have in mind. Wonderful. I've actually been developing some ideas for a consultation business, high-end event coordination with personalized financial management. I think your professional background would be perfect for the financial side. Personalized financial management. She was recruiting me to help with the money laundering aspects of her operation, probably assuming that my accounting expertise would make the transactions less detectable. We arranged to meet for lunch on Thursday at a restaurant in downtown Charlotte. Somewhere public where our conversation would look like normal, sister bonding to any observer. I spent the days between her call and our lunch meeting, researching Trevor's investment management business, and preparing for whatever Victoria was planning to propose. Trevor's company, Elite Wealth Advisors, managed portfolios for about 30 clients according to their website. The client testimonials were generic, and the investment philosophy was vague enough to accommodate almost any type of financial arrangement. What was more interesting was the company's location, a small office in a building that housed several other financial services businesses, the kind of setup that would make it easy to move money between different companies without attracting attention. I also researched the wedding vendors Victoria had contacted since our wedding. Each business was legitimate, but several had been investigated for tax irregularities in the past. Victoria wasn't randomly selecting vendors to approach. She was specifically targeting businesses that already had complicated relationships with financial reporting requirements. By Thursday, I felt prepared for whatever Victoria was planning to propose. What I wasn't prepared for was her appearance when she arrived at the restaurant. She looked different, more polished and professional than I'd ever seen her. Her outfit was expensive but conservative. Her makeup was subtle, and she carried a leather portfolio that looked like something a legitimate business consultant would use. "You look great," I said as she sat down across from me. "Thank you. I've been working with an image consultant. If I'm going to be representing the family in business settings, I want to make sure I project the right impression, representing the family." She was positioning herself as our family's business representative, using our reputation and connections to provide credibility for her criminal operations. "Tell me about this consultation business you're developing." Victoria opened her portfolio and pulled out a professionally designed brochure that outlined services for luxury event coordination with integrated financial planning. The marketing materials were impressive, with photos from our wedding prominently featured, and testimonials from vendors praising Victoria's coordination skills and understanding of complex payment requirements. "The concept is simple," she explained. "Wealthy families need help coordinating major events, but they also need someone who understands their financial privacy requirements. Most event planners can handle logistics, but they don't understand the complexities of managing payments for clients who prefer discretion. Financial privacy requirements." She was marketing money laundering as a luxury service for wealthy families who wanted to keep their financial transactions private. "What kind of privacy requirements?" "Oh, you know how it is with high net worth clients. They prefer cash transactions for tax optimization. They want to avoid creating paper trails that could complicate estate planning. They need someone who can coordinate payments across multiple vendors without creating reporting obligations." Tax optimization, estate plan, reporting obligations. Victoria had learned the language of legitimate financial planning, and was using it to describe clearly illegal activities. "That makes sense. Where do you see my role in this?" Victoria leaned forward, her eyes bright with excitement. "Cassie, your forensic accounting background is perfect for this. You understand how financial transactions work, how to structure payments to meet client requirements, how to ensure everything is properly documented for their record." She wanted me to use my professional expertise to make their money laundering operation more sophisticated and harder to detect. "I'd be handling the financial coordination while you focus on event planning." "Exactly. I handle vendor relationships and logistics. You handle payment structures and financial documentation. Together we can offer a complete service that other event planners can't match." A complete service. Victoria had created a business model that combined event planning with money laundering, using legitimate celebrations as cover for financial crimes. She spent the next hour walking me through her business plan, which was surprisingly thorough and professional. She'd researched market demand for luxury event services, identified target clients who would value financial discretion, and developed pricing structures that would generate significant revenue while keeping transaction sizes below federal reporting thresholds. The beauty of this model, she explained, is that it's completely scalable. We start with weddings because they involve the largest payments and the most vendors, but we can expand to corporate events, charity galas, family celebration, any occasion where wealthy clients need event coordination and financial privacy. Completely scalable. Victoria wasn't thinking small. She was planning to build a substantial criminal enterprise that would use my professional credentials and our family's reputation to provide cover for ongoing money laundering operations. Victoria, this sounds like a significant business opportunity. Can you walk me through some examples of how the financial coordination would work? She pulled out her phone and showed me photos from our wedding weekend, focusing on her interactions with vendors and the payment processes she'd established. Take the florist, for example. Instead of the client paying directly through credit cards or checks, which create records and reporting obligations, I coordinate cash payments that are structured as family gifts or personal reimbursement. The vendor gets paid, the client maintains financial privacy, and the transaction doesn't trigger any reporting requirements. Family gifts, personal reimbursements. She was using family relationships to disguise money laundering as legitimate financial arrangement. And Trevor's investment clients are interested in this kind of service? Oh, absolutely. Trevor works with several high net worth individuals who have complex financial situations. They need discretion, and they're willing to pay premium rates for coordination services that understand their requirements. Complex financial situations, high net worth individuals, discretion. Victoria was describing Trevor's money laundering clients as if they were legitimate wealthy families with normal privacy concerns. I'd love to meet some of these potential clients, get a better understanding of what they're looking for. Victoria's smile flickered for just a moment, and I realized I'd pushed slightly too hard. She recovered quickly, but I could see her calculating how much information to share. Of course, I think it would be helpful for you to understand the client base before we formalize our partnership. Maybe we could arrange a casual meeting with one of Trevor's clients, who's planning an upcoming event. A casual meeting. She was willing to introduce me to the money laundering operation, probably because she assumed my accounting background would make me a valuable asset rather than a threat. That sounds perfect. When were you thinking? Actually, Trevor has a client meeting scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, a family that's planning their daughter's engagement party, very high-end, very discreet. Would you be available to join us tomorrow afternoon? Victoria was moving fast, eager to get me involved before I had time to reconsider or ask too many questions. I'd love to. Should I prepare anything specific? Just bring your professional expertise and your understanding of how sophisticated financial coordination works. This client values competence and discretion above everything else. Competence and discretion, code words for criminal expertise and willingness to stay quiet about illegal activity. After lunch, I walked back to my office feeling like I'd been recruited into a criminal organization while having what appeared to be a normal business discussion with my sister. Victoria had presented money laundering as luxury event planning, criminal activity as professional services, and federal crimes as family business opportunities. She'd also provided me with everything Agent Chen needed to understand the full scope of the operation. Victoria wasn't just helping Trevor launder money from his investment clients, she was building a comprehensive criminal enterprise that would use event planning as cover for large-scale financial crimes. I called Agent Chen from my office and arranged to meet her that evening. We needed to discuss how to handle tomorrow's client meeting, and what kind of evidence would be most valuable for building a federal case. Cassie, this is moving faster than we anticipated, Agent Chen said when we met at a coffee shop near my apartment. If Victoria was introducing you to actual clients tomorrow, we need to be prepared to document everything properly. What do you mean? I mean, we need you to be wired for the meeting. If these clients discuss the source of their money or the purpose of the laundering operation, that testimony could be crucial for prosecution. Why? Agent Chen wanted me to record my conversation with Trevor's money laundering clients, documenting their criminal activities while pretending to be interested in joining their operation. Is that safe? If they discover I'm recording, if anything seems dangerous, we'll intervene immediately. But Cassie, this opportunity might not come again. If these clients trust Victoria enough to meet with her sister, they might be willing to discuss details they wouldn't share with anyone else. Details they wouldn't share with anyone else, like the source of their dirty money, the scope of their criminal activities, and their future plans for using Victoria's event planning business to launder larger amounts. What do I need to do? Agent Chen pulled a small device from her purse, something that looked like a pen but was actually a recording device. Keep this with you during the meeting. Act interested in their business opportunities, but don't push for information. Let them volunteer details about their operation. Act interested in criminal opportunities. Pretend to be eager to join a money laundering operation. Record evidence that would send my sister and her clients to federal prison. Agent Chen, after tomorrow, how much longer does this investigation continue? That depends on what we learn. If the clients tomorrow provide evidence of larger criminal activities, we might need to extend the investigation to gather more evidence, but if we have enough to establish the core criminal enterprise, we could move to arrests within the next few weeks. Victoria had no idea that her successful business launch was actually the final phase of an FBI investigation. She thought she was building a criminal empire, but she was actually providing law enforcement with everything they needed to destroy her. I went home that night and told Dylan about tomorrow's meeting and my agreement to record the conversation. He listened without interrupting, then asked the same question I'd been asking myself. Are you sure you want to do this? Once you record that conversation, there's no going back. Dylan, she's already involved me in federal crimes. She used our wedding to establish relationships with money laundering clients. She's trying to recruit me as a business partner in a criminal organization. I'm already implicated in this whether I cooperate with the FBI or not. But if you cooperate, you're actively working to send your sister to prison. If I don't cooperate, I'm passively allowing her to build a criminal enterprise, using our family as cover. Dylan nodded slowly. You're right. I just want to make sure you're prepared for how our families are going to react when this becomes public. Our families, Dylan's family would probably be supportive, understanding that I'd been placed in an impossible situation and made the right choice. My family would probably be furious, viewing my cooperation with law enforcement as a betrayal that destroyed Victoria's future and humiliated our parents. But I'd already made my choice the night of our wedding when I called Agent Chen. Everything since then had just been following through on the decision to stop letting Victoria use our family for criminal activity. I'm prepared, I said. And tomorrow, we're going to get everything the FBI needs to end this. The next afternoon, I met Victoria and Trevor at Elite Wealth Advisors for what was supposedly a consultation with potential clients, but was actually my introduction to a money laundering operation. I wore a professional outfit that concealed the recording device Agent Chen had given me, and I carried a notebook where I could take legitimate-looking notes while documenting criminal activity. Trevor's office was smaller than I'd expected, with generic business furniture and motivational posters that looked like they'd come from a corporate training seminar. But his clients, when they arrived, looked exactly like what I'd imagined money launderers would look like: expensive clothes, careful speech, and the kind of alerts that suggested they were constantly evaluating threats and opportunities. Marcus and Elena Rodriguez, Trevor introduced them. They're planning their daughter's engagement party and looking for coordination services that understand their privacy requirements. Privacy requirements. Even in introductions, everyone spoke in code about the illegal nature of their business relationship. Elena Rodriguez was elegantly dressed and spoke with the careful diction of someone who'd learned to project respectability despite questionable income sources. Marcus was quieter, watching everything and saying little. But when he did speak, it was clear he was the decision-maker in their relationship. Miss Brooks, Elena said to me, Trevor explained that you have experience with financial coordination for luxury events. Financial coordination. My forensic accounting background was being presented as expertise in money laundering, rather than expertise in detecting money laundering. I work in financial analysis, I said carefully. I understand how complex transactions can be structured to meet various client requirements. Good. Our family has specific needs when it comes to payment processing. We prefer arrangements that minimize documentation and reporting obligations. Minimize documentation and reporting obligations. Elena was directly describing money laundering, while making it sound like normal wealthy family preferences. Victoria jumped in, eager to demonstrate her understanding of their requirements. Elena, I think Cassie's background is perfect for what you're looking for. She understands how to structure payments across multiple vendors while maintaining the privacy and flexibility your family values. Privacy and flexibility. Victoria was describing my potential role in their criminal enterprise, as if it were luxury customer service. Tell me more about your family's business interests, I said to Marcus. It helps me understand the context for event coordination requirements. Marcus glanced at Trevor, who nodded slightly. We have investments in several different sectors: real estate development, import-export operations, cash-intensive businesses. Our financial arrangements can be complex, and we need service providers who understand discretion. Import-export operations, cash-intensive business. Marcus was describing obvious money laundering sources, while making them sound like legitimate business investments. I understand. Complex financial situations require careful coordination to ensure everything is handled appropriately. Elena leaned forward, clearly pleased with my response. Exactly. We've worked with Trevor for several years, and he's helped us structure our investments to optimize privacy and minimize unnecessary reporting. But we've had difficulty finding event coordinators who understand similar principles. Optimize privacy, minimize reporting. Elena was describing tax evasion and money laundering as investment strategy. For the next hour, the Rodriguez family outlined their requirements for their daughter's engagement party, which would involve multiple vendors, large cash payments, and coordination structures designed to obscure the money trail. They also discussed their interest in ongoing services for future family events, corporate celebrations, and community fundraising activities. The key, Marcus explained, is finding service providers who understand that some clients prefer traditional payment methods and privacy protection over conventional business practices. Traditional payment methods, privacy protection. Marcus was describing criminal financial arrangements as cultural preferences. Victoria took detailed notes about their event requirements, while I documented their discussion of payment structures and reporting avoidance. By the end of the meeting, I had recorded clear evidence of money laundering coordination, tax evasion planning, and criminal enterprise development. I think this partnership could be very beneficial for everyone involved, Elena said, as the meeting concluded. Trevor speaks very highly of Victoria's coordination skills, and it's clear that Cassie understands the financial sophistication our family requires. Financial sophistication. My potential willingness to participate in money laundering was being described as professional expertise. After the Rodriguez family left, Victoria, Trevor, and I discussed next steps for developing our business partnership. Victoria was excited about the revenue potential, Trevor was pleased with the coordination possibilities, and I was amazed by how openly they discussed criminal activities while framing them as legitimate business service. Cassie, I think this is going to be perfect, Victoria said, as we prepared to leave Trevor's office. You bring credibility and expertise, I bring vendor relationships and coordination skills, and Trevor brings clients who need exactly what we can provide. A sophisticated money laundering operation, disguised as luxury event planning services. I'm excited about the possibilities, I said truthfully. I was excited, but not for the reasons Victoria assumed. That evening, I met Agent Chen to transfer the recording and discuss what I'd learned about the criminal organization's scope and structure. The evidence was even better than she'd hoped, with clear documentation of money laundering coordination and multiple participants discussing criminal activities. Cassie, this recording provides everything we need for federal charges. The Rodriguez family described money laundering operations, Trevor coordinated criminal financial services, and Victoria recruited you as a business partner in illegal activities. Everything they needed for federal charge. Victoria's successful client meeting had actually been the final evidence-gathering session for an FBI investigation that would destroy her criminal enterprise before it could fully develop. What happens next? Next week, we execute arrest warrant. Victoria, Trevor, and their clients will all be charged with money laundering, conspiracy, and financial fraud. The investigation is complete. Arrest warrants. After months of planning and weeks of evidence gathering, the investigation was finally complete. Victoria's criminal career would end before she realized it had begun. I went home that night knowing that everything would change within days. Victoria would be arrested, our family would be devastated, and I would have to live with the knowledge that I'd been instrumental in sending my sister to federal prison. But I also went home knowing that I'd stopped a criminal enterprise from fully developing, protected other potential victims from being recruited into illegal activities, and ensured that my family's reputation wouldn't be permanently destroyed by Victoria's criminal ambition. Sometimes the right choice isn't the easy choice, but it's still the right choice. The arrest warrants were executed on a Tuesday morning at 7:30, when Victoria was having coffee at her favorite cafe and posting Instagram stories about her expanding event planning business. I knew the timing because Agent Chen had called me an hour earlier to let me know the operation was beginning. By the time Victoria's vanilla latte arrived at her table, FBI agents were already positioning themselves throughout the establishment. I wasn't there to witness it directly, but Agent Chen sent me a text afterward. Clean arrest, no resistance. She seemed genuinely surprised. Victoria had been so confident in her criminal enterprise, so certain that she'd created the perfect money laundering operation, that she'd never considered the possibility of law enforcement involvement. She'd built her entire scheme on the assumption that family relationships and social expectations would provide perfect cover for illegal activity. Trevor was arrested simultaneously at his office, where agents found detailed records of client financial arrangements, payment coordination schedules, and business development plans that documented the full scope of their criminal organization. According to Agent Chen, he'd also seemed shocked, apparently believing that the sophisticated nature of their operation made it undetectable. The Rodriguez family was taken into custody at their home in South Charlotte, where agents discovered evidence of multiple ongoing money laundering operations involving real estate transactions, import business arrangements, and investment portfolio management. Their arrest revealed that Victoria and Trevor's event planning scheme was just one component of a much larger criminal network. By noon, the story was all over local news. Federal money laundering ring exposed through wedding industry investigation was the headline that appeared on every Charlotte television station and newspaper website. The coverage included photos of Victoria being led away in handcuffs, Trevor's office building surrounded by FBI vehicles, and statements from federal prosecutors about the scope of the criminal enterprise. My phone started ringing immediately. First our parents, then our extended family, then friends, who'd seen the news and recognized Victoria's name. I let most calls go to voicemail, not ready to explain my role in the investigation or defend my decision to cooperate with law enforcement. Dylan handled the calls that came to our landline, patiently explaining to each concerned relative that we were still processing the news and would reach out when we were ready to discuss the situation. His calm responses provided a buffer that allowed me to focus on preparing for what I knew would be difficult conversations with our family. The first voicemail from our mother was exactly what I'd expected: confusion, denial, and anger that was already starting to focus on me rather than Victoria. "Cassie, I don't understand what's happening. The news is saying Victoria was arrested for money laundering, which is obviously some kind of mistake. But the reports mention wedding vendors from your ceremony. Did you tell the police something? Call me immediately." The second voicemail, left an hour later, was less confused and more accusatory. "Cassie, your father and I have been trying to reach you all day. We've spoken to Victoria's lawyer and he says the charges are based on testimony from a family member. We need to know what you told the authorities and why you didn't come to us first before involving outsiders in family business." Our mother was already framing Victoria's criminal activities as a family matter that should have been handled privately rather than through law enforcement. She was positioning my cooperation with the FBI as a betrayal of family loyalty rather than a necessary response to criminal behavior. The third voicemail was from our father and his tone was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "Cassie, I've retained an attorney to represent Victoria. He's advised us that family members who provide testimony against defendants can face civil liability for damages resulting from false accusations. I suggest you consider very carefully how you proceed with this situation. Civil liability for false accusation. Our father was threatening to sue me if my testimony contributed to Victoria's conviction. He was treating my cooperation with a federal investigation as a malicious attack on Victoria rather than an appropriate response to criminal activity. By evening, the full scope of media coverage had become clear. Victoria's arrest was the lead story on every local news program, with reporters describing her as the mastermind of a sophisticated money laundering operation that had used luxury event planning as cover for moving millions of dollars in criminal proceeds. The coverage included interviews with wedding vendors who described Victoria's unusual payment requirements and coordination demands. Sarah from Mountain Blooms appeared on camera explaining how Victoria had pressured her to accept cash payments for services while claiming it was normal practice for wealthy families. I was uncomfortable with the arrangement from the beginning, Sarah told the reporter, but she was so insistent, and she made it sound like this was just how her family handled business. I should have trusted my instinct. Marcus, our wedding photographer, gave a similar interview describing Victoria's demands for cash payments and her coordination of services that seemed designed to create complicated financial relationships rather than provide normal event plan. Looking back, it's obvious that she wasn't really interested in creating beautiful weddings, Marcus said. She was interested in creating complex vendor relationships that could be used for ongoing financial arrangement. The most damaging coverage came from federal prosecutors, who held a press conference describing the criminal organization's structure and methods. U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh explained how the defendants had used family relationships and social connections to provide credibility for money laundering operations. This criminal enterprise exploited the trust and reputation of legitimate families to create cover for illegal financial activities, Walsh stated. The defendants used wedding celebrations and family events as fronts for moving criminal proceeds through seemingly normal business transactions. They exploited the trust and reputation of legitimate families. The prosecutors were making it clear that Victoria hadn't just committed financial crimes, she'd used our family as unwitting accomplices in criminal activities, potentially exposing all of us to legal liability and reputational damage. The press conference also revealed details about the investigation that I hadn't known. Agent Chen's team had been monitoring Trevor's investment business for 6 months before my wedding, tracking suspicious cash movements and identifying patterns that suggested money laundering. My wedding had provided the evidence they needed to understand how the operation worked, but the investigation had begun long before Victoria decided to use my celebration as a criminal opportunity. The wedding industry component of this scheme was particularly insidious, Agent Walsh continued, because it relied on the defendant's ability to exploit family relationships and social expectations. The primary defendant used her sister's wedding to establish credibility with vendors and demonstrate the money laundering process to potential clients. Used her sister's wedding. The federal prosecutor was describing my wedding as evidence in a criminal case, my marriage celebration as a demonstration of money laundering technique. Victoria had taken the most important day of my life and converted it into criminal activity that was now being dissected in federal court filings and media coverage. That evening, Dylan and I sat in our living room watching news coverage of Victoria's arrest while I tried to process the reality that my sister was now a federal criminal defendant. The woman who'd spent our wedding weekend positioning herself as a helpful family member was being described by prosecutors as the coordinator of a sophisticated criminal enterprise. "Are you okay?" Dylan asked during a commercial break. I considered the question serious. Was I okay with the fact that my sister was facing decades in federal prison? Was I okay with the knowledge that I'd provided crucial evidence for her prosecution? Was I okay with the reality that our family would probably never recover from this scandal? I'm okay with knowing that she won't be able to use our family for criminal activities anymore, I said finally. I'm okay with preventing other families from being exploited the way she exploited us, but I'm not okay with how much this is going to hurt our parents. Your parents made their choice when they decided to blame you instead of Victoria. You didn't create this situation, and you're not responsible for fixing it. Dylan was right, but family dynamics aren't always logical. Our parents had spent decades enabling Victoria's manipulative behavior, explaining away her selfishness and making excuses for her treatment of other family members. They weren't going to suddenly acknowledge that their daughter was capable of criminal behavior, especially when they could blame me for cooperating with law enforcement instead. The next morning brought a development I hadn't anticipated. Victoria had posted bail and was already working to manage the public relations aspect of her legal situation. Her Instagram account, which had been documenting her event planning business development, now featured a carefully crafted statement about false accusations and family betrayal. I'm heartbroken that a family member would participate in what appears to be a malicious prosecution based on misunderstandings about normal business practices. Victoria's post read, I've devoted my career to helping families celebrate important milestones, and I'm confident that the truth about these baseless accusations will become clear during the legal process. Misunderstandings about normal business practices. Victoria was positioning her money laundering coordination as legitimate business activity that had been mischaracterized by overzealous prosecutors and a vindictive family member. The post included several photos from our wedding weekend, showing Victoria coordinating with vendors and managing logistics. She'd captioned them as examples of her dedication to client service and attention to detail, conveniently omitting any mention of the cash payments and money laundering coordination that had actually been occurring during those interactions. Within hours, the post had dozens of comments from friends and family members expressing support for Victoria and outrage about her arrest. Several relatives specifically criticized my decision to cooperate with law enforcement, arguing that family loyalty should have prevented me from providing testimony that could harm Victoria's future. Can't believe Cassie would throw her own sister under the bus like this, wrote our cousin Michelle. Family is supposed to stick together no matter what. Victoria was just trying to help make Cassie's wedding perfect, and this is how she gets thanked, added our Aunt Carolyn. Some people have no appreciation for family sacrifice. Family sacrifice. Victoria's criminal activities were being reframed as selfless service to family members who lacked sufficient gratitude for her effort. The social media campaign was clearly coordinated, with similar language appearing in multiple comments and shares. Victoria was using her network of friends and family members to create a narrative about malicious prosecution and family betrayal, positioning herself as the victim of an investigation rather than the perpetrator of criminal activity. My phone rang while I was reading through the increasingly hostile comments on Victoria's post. Agent Chen's number appeared on the screen, and I answered immediately. Cassie, I wanted to give you a heads up about what's happening with the case. Victoria's legal team is pursuing an aggressive defense strategy that includes challenging the credibility of family member testimony. What does that mean? It means they're going to argue that your cooperation with our investigation was motivated by family jealousy rather than legitimate concern about criminal activity. They're going to try to paint you as a vindictive sister who wanted to destroy Victoria's success. Family jealous. Victoria's lawyers were going to argue that I'd fabricated evidence of money laundering because I was envious of her event planning business and upset about the changes she'd made to my wedding. Can they do that? I mean, there's recorded evidence of criminal activity. The Rodriguez family clearly described money laundering operations. Absolutely, and that evidence is solid. But defense attorneys always try to undermine prosecution witnesses, especially when those witnesses are family members. They'll argue that your testimony is biased and your evidence gathering was motivated by personal animosity rather than law enforcement cooperation. My decision to cooperate with a federal investigation was going to be characterized as sisterly rivalry taken to criminal extremes. Agent Chen, what should I expect during the trial? Expect Victoria's defense team to scrutinize every aspect of your relationship with her. They'll bring up childhood conflicts, family dynamics, any history of disagreements or competition. They'll try to make the jury believe that you used law enforcement to settle personal scores. Childhood conflicts, family dynamic. Victoria's lawyers were going to dissect our entire relationship history to find evidence that I was predisposed to harm her, regardless of whether she'd actually committed crimes. Will the prosecution support my testimony? Absolutely. Your evidence is crucial to our case and will prepare you thoroughly for cross-examination. But I want you to understand that this process is going to be emotionally difficult. Defense attorneys are trained to make prosecution witnesses doubt themselves and their motivation. Make me doubt myself. Victoria's legal team would try to convince me that I'd misunderstood innocent business activities, that I'd overreacted to normal family conflicts, that I'd destroyed my sister's life based on misinterpretations and personal grievance. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to imagine testifying against Victoria in federal court while her lawyers argued that my evidence was fabricated out of family jealousy. I'd have to explain our childhood dynamics, defend my motivations for cooperating with law enforcement, and maintain credibility while Victoria's supporters filled the courtroom, claiming I was a vindictive sister who'd betrayed family loyalty. Dylan found me there an hour later, staring at my laptop screen where Victoria's social media post had accumulated even more supportive comments from family members who were convinced of her innocence and my maliciousness. "You're not reading the comments, are you?" he asked. I needed to understand what I'm facing. Victoria's building a narrative about family betrayal and false accusations. Her supporters genuinely believe that I've destroyed an innocent person's life out of jealousy. Her supporters don't have access to the evidence you provide. They don't know about the recorded conversations with money laundering clients or the documented coordination of criminal activities. But they know about family dynamics. They know that Victoria and I have had conflicts over the years, that I was upset about the wedding changes, that she's always been the favorite daughter. Her lawyers are going to use all of that to argue that my testimony is unreliable. Dylan sat down across from me and closed my laptop, ending my review of the increasingly hostile social media comments. "Cassie, you didn't fabricate evidence. You didn't misinterpret innocent activity. You documented criminal behavior and cooperated with law enforcement to prevent ongoing illegal activities. The jury will see the evidence, and they'll understand the difference between family conflict and criminal prosecution." I wanted to believe him, but I was beginning to understand the full scope of what Victoria's defense strategy would entail. She wasn't just fighting criminal charges. She was fighting for her freedom by destroying my credibility and turning our family conflict into reasonable doubt about her guilt. The next few days brought a steady stream of developments that made the situation increasingly complex. Victoria's lawyer gave interviews characterizing the charges as prosecutorial overreach based on unreliable family testimony. Trevor's attorney argued that his client had been manipulated by Victoria into participating in activities he didn't understand were illegal. The Rodriguez family's lawyers claimed their clients were victims of discriminatory prosecution based on ethnic profiling. Each defense strategy was designed to shift blame away from the defendants and onto either law enforcement or prosecution witnesses. Victoria was portrayed as an ambitious event planner whose business practices had been mischaracterized by jealous family members. Trevor was described as a naive investment advisor who'd been deceived by Victoria about the nature of their business relationship. The Rodriguez family was positioned as legitimate business people who'd been targeted because of their immigrant background and cash-based business practices. The media coverage became increasingly sympathetic to the defendants as their public relations campaigns gained momentum. Local news stations interviewed character witnesses who described Victoria as a dedicated family member who'd always been generous with her time and resources. Business associates testified to Trevor's professional integrity and commitment to client service. Community leaders spoke about the Rodriguez family's charitable contributions and civic involvement. "Victoria Brooks has always been someone who puts family first," said Mrs. Helen Price, a family friend who'd known Victoria since childhood. "The idea that she would do anything to harm her sister or exploit her family is completely contrary to everything I know about her character. Put family first." Miss Price was describing Victoria's manipulation and exploitation of family relationships as evidence of her devotion to family welfare. The most damaging coverage came from an interview with our parents, who appeared on local television to defend Victoria and criticize my cooperation with law enforcement. "We're devastated by these charges," our mother said, "but we're even more hurt by the fact that our own daughter participated in an investigation that's destroying Victoria's future. Families should resolve conflicts privately, not through criminal prosecution. Resolve conflicts privately." Our mother was characterizing federal money laundering charges as a family conflict that should have been handled through mediation rather than law enforcement. Our father was more direct in his criticism.
Cassie's decision to cooperate with prosecutors has torn our family apart. We raised our daughters to support each other, not to use law enforcement as a weapon in sibling disputes. Use law enforcement as a weapon. Our father was describing my cooperation with a federal investigation as an attack on Victoria rather than an appropriate response to criminal behavior. The interview was devastating to watch, not just because of the public criticism but because of what it revealed about our parents' understanding of the situation. They genuinely believed that Victoria was innocent and that I had manipulated law enforcement into prosecuting her for normal business activities. They saw the criminal charges as evidence of my vindictiveness rather than Victoria's criminal behavior. That evening, I received a call from our family's attorney, who'd been retained to represent our parents' interest during the ongoing investigation. Cassie, I need to discuss the family's legal exposure related to Victoria's activity. There's potential civil liability if it can be proven that family members knowingly participated in or benefited from criminal activities. Civil liability. Our family could face lawsuits from victims of Victoria's money laundering operation, especially if those victims could prove that family members had provided assistance or credibility for criminal activities. What kind of assistance? Allowing family events to be used as cover for criminal activities, providing character references that helped establish credibility with victims, participating in business meetings where criminal activities were discussed. Family events, character references, business meetings. Victoria had involved our entire family in her criminal enterprise, potentially exposing all of us to legal consequences from her illegal activities. I cooperated with law enforcement specifically to prevent ongoing criminal activities. Doesn't that protect me from civil liability? Your cooperation with law enforcement helps establish that you didn't knowingly participate in criminal activities after you became aware of them, but it doesn't necessarily protect you from liability for actions taken before you understood the criminal nature of Victoria's business. Actions taken before I understood.
Like allowing my wedding to be used as a money laundering demonstration, providing family credibility for Victoria's vendor relationships, and giving her access to my professional network for client recruitment. What about our parents? Your parents' situation is more complicated. They provided financial support for Victoria's business activities and made public statements vouching for her character and business practices. If victims can prove that parental support helped legitimize criminal activities, there could be significant liability exposure. Our parents could lose their savings, their home, and their retirement security because Victoria had used their support and reputation to provide credibility for criminal activities. After I hung up, I realized that Victoria's criminal enterprise had created a web of potential liability that extended far beyond her own legal consequences. She'd involved our entire family in activities that could result in civil lawsuits, financial ruin, and reputational destruction that would last for decades. But she'd also created a situation where my cooperation with law enforcement was the only thing protecting our family from even worse consequences. If I hadn't documented Victoria's criminal activities and provided evidence to federal prosecutors, the investigation would have continued until every family member was potentially implicated as a knowing participant in money laundering operation. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Trevor had agreed to a plea bargain that included cooperation with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. His attorney announced that Trevor would provide testimony about the criminal organization's structure and operations, including detailed information about client relationships and money laundering coordination. Trevor's cooperation meant that Victoria would face trial with a co-defendant who was prepared to testify against her. It also meant that the prosecution's case no longer depended entirely on my testimony and evidence gathering. Trevor could provide insider knowledge about the criminal enterprise that would corroborate my documentation of illegal activity. Victoria's response to Trevor's plea agreement was swift and predictable. A social media post describing his cooperation as betrayal by someone she'd trusted with her business future. I'm heartbroken that someone I considered a partner would fabricate testimony to save himself from consequences of his own illegal activities. Victoria posted. It's becoming clear that this prosecution is based on false testimony from people who want to destroy my reputation and business success. False testimony from people who want to destroy her reputation. Victoria was positioning both Trevor and me as unreliable witnesses, whose cooperation with law enforcement was motivated by personal animosity rather than legitimate evidence of criminal activity. But Trevor's plea agreement also revealed details about the criminal organization that I hadn't known. According to court filings, the money laundering operation had been processing over $2 million annually through wedding and event vendor relationships. The Rodriguez family alone had been moving hundreds of thousands of dollars in criminal proceeds through Victoria's coordination service. $2 million annually. Victoria's criminal enterprise was far more substantial than anyone had realized, with my wedding serving as just one demonstration of money laundering capabilities that were being used to process massive amounts of illegal income. The scale of the operation also explained why federal prosecutors were treating the case as a major criminal investigation, rather than a simple financial fraud. Victoria hadn't just committed money laundering. She'd built a sophisticated criminal organization that was processing millions of dollars in illegal proceeds while using family relationships and social connections to avoid detection. As I prepared for my role as a prosecution witness in a federal criminal trial, I understood that this case was about much more than family conflict or wedding dispute. Victoria had created a criminal enterprise that exploited trust, manipulated relationships, and used legitimate celebrations as cover for illegal activity. She'd also created a situation where the only way to protect our family from ongoing criminal liability was to ensure that her operation was completely dismantled through successful prosecution. My cooperation with law enforcement wasn't just about stopping Victoria's criminal activity. It was about protecting everyone she'd involved in her illegal enterprise from becoming unwitting accomplices to federal crime. The trial was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks, and Victoria's legal team was already filing motions challenging the admissibility of my testimony and the evidence I'd gathered. They were arguing that family relationships created inherent bias that made my cooperation unreliable, and that law enforcement had improperly used family dynamics to gather evidence that should be excluded from trial. 6 weeks to prepare for testifying against my sister in federal court, while her lawyers argued that I was a vindictive family member who'd fabricated evidence out of jealousy. 6 weeks to prepare for cross-examination designed to make me doubt my own motivations and question my understanding of what I'd witnessed. But also 6 weeks to prepare for ending Victoria's criminal enterprise and ensuring that she couldn't continue using our family as cover for illegal activities. 6 weeks to prepare for justice that would protect other families from being exploited the way Victoria had exploited ours. I'd made my choice the night I called Agent Chen from the Blue Room at Mountain View Estate. Everything since then had just been following through on the decision to stop letting Victoria use our family for criminal activity. In 6 weeks, that decision would finally be validated in federal court. The federal courthouse in Charlotte was imposing in the way that government buildings are designed to be, all marble columns and security checkpoints that remind you that serious business happens within those walls. I'd been inside twice before for case consultations in my forensic accounting work, but walking through those metal detectors as a prosecution witness felt entirely different. Dylan squeezed my hand as we approached the courtroom where Victoria's trial would begin. Agent Chen had prepared me extensively for what to expect, but no amount of preparation could fully ready someone for testifying against their own sister in a federal criminal proceeding. "You've got this," Dylan whispered as we found seats in the gallery reserved for prosecution witnesses and their families. The courtroom filled quickly with reporters, curious observers and supporters for both sides. Victoria entered wearing a navy blue suit that made her look professional and sympathetic, her hair styled in a way that suggested competence rather than glamour. Her legal team had clearly coached her on courtroom appearance, transforming her from the social media influencer who'd posted defiant statements into someone who looked like a wrongfully accused businesswoman. Our parents sat directly behind Victoria's table, their presence a clear statement about which daughter they supported in this legal battle. They didn't acknowledge me when they entered, and I understood that the family division created by Victoria's criminal activities had become permanent. U.S. Jennifer Walsh delivered an opening statement, that methodically outlined the money laundering operation Victoria had coordinated. She described how my wedding had served as a demonstration of criminal capabilities, how vendor relationships had been exploited to move illegal funds, and how family connections had provided credibility for ongoing criminal activity. The defendant didn't just commit financial crimes, Walsh told the jury. She weaponized family relationships and social trust to build a criminal enterprise that processed millions of dollars in illegal proceeds. She turned celebrations into crime scenes and converted family loyalty into criminal liability. Weaponized family relationships. The prosecution was framing Victoria's manipulation of our family as a calculated criminal strategy rather than normal family dynamics taken too far. Victoria's defense attorney Robert Manning presented a starkly different narrative during his opening statement. He described Victoria as an ambitious young woman whose legitimate business activities had been mischaracterized by vindictive family members and overzealous prosecutors. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about family jealousy disguised as criminal prosecution, Manning argued. The defendant's own sister couldn't tolerate her success and chose to destroy her future through false accusations and manufactured evidence. Family jealousy disguised as criminal prosecution. Manning was positioning my cooperation with law enforcement as a malicious attack on Victoria rather than an appropriate response to criminal behavior. The prosecution's case unfolded over 3 days, with testimony from vendors who described Victoria's unusual payment demands, federal agents who explained money laundering detection methods, and financial experts who analyzed the movement of illegal funds through wedding industry transactions. Sarah from Mountain Blooms testified about the pressure Victoria had applied to accept cash payments and modify normal business practices. Marcus, our photographer, described coordination requests that seemed designed to create complex vendor relationships rather than provide normal event services. It became clear that she wasn't interested in creating beautiful weddings. Marcus told the jury she was interested in creating financial relationships that could be used for purposes that had nothing to do with event planning. The most damaging testimony came from Trevor, whose plea agreement required him to provide detailed information about the criminal organization's structure and operations. He described how Victoria had recruited vendors for money laundering purposes, how family events had been used to demonstrate criminal capabilities to potential clients, and how my wedding had served as the foundation for a criminal enterprise that processed over $2 million in illegal proceeds. Victoria was the mastermind, Trevor testified. She understood how to use family relationships and social connections to make criminal activities look legitimate. Without her coordination skills and family credibility, the money laundering operation couldn't have functioned. Trevor's testimony was devastating because it came from someone who'd been Victoria's business partner and romantic partner. He couldn't be dismissed as a vindictive family member or jealous sibling. His cooperation with prosecutors provided insider knowledge that corroborated all the evidence I'd gathered. When my turn to testify arrived, I walked to the witness stand knowing that Victoria's legal team would do everything possible to undermine my credibility and portray my cooperation as family betrayal rather than law enforcement assistance. Manning's cross-examination was exactly what Agent Chen had prepared me for, a systematic attack on my motivations, my relationship with Victoria, and my understanding of the events I'd witnessed. Miss Brooks, Manning began, isn't it true that you've been jealous of your sister's success throughout your entire life? No, that's not true. Isn't it true that you were upset about changes Victoria made to your wedding decorations and accommodation? I was surprised by changes that were made without my knowledge or consent, surprised enough to contact law enforcement and make accusations about criminal activity. I contacted law enforcement after observing evidence of money laundering coordination. Manning spent 2 hours challenging every aspect of my testimony, suggesting that I'd misunderstood innocent business activities, that I'd fabricated evidence out of family resentment, and that I'd manipulated law enforcement into prosecuting Victoria for normal event planning services. Miss Brooks, isn't it convenient that your supposed evidence of criminal activity emerged only after you were upset about wedding planning decisions? The evidence emerged when I observed coordination of suspicious financial transactions that matched patterns I recognize from my forensic accounting work. Your forensic accounting work. So you consider yourself an expert in detecting criminal activity. I consider myself qualified to recognize money laundering coordination when I observe it. Qualified enough to destroy your sister's future based on your interpretation of business activities you admit you didn't fully understand at the time. Manning was skilled at making reasonable responses sound defensive and making my cooperation with law enforcement seem vindictive. But Agent Chen had prepared me for exactly this type of cross-examination, and I maintained my composure while clearly explaining what I'd observed and why I'd cooperated with the investigation. The prosecution's redirect examination allowed Walsh to clarify key points and reinforce the evidence I'd provided. She walked me through the recorded conversations with money laundering clients, the documentation of cash payment coordination, and the business development meetings where criminal activities had been explicitly discussed. Miss Brooks, when you recorded conversations with the Rodriguez family, what specifically did they discuss? They discussed their need for event coordination services that would minimize financial documentation and reporting obligations. They described their preference for cash transactions and their interest in ongoing services for money laundering purposes. In your professional opinion as a forensic accountant, were these discussions consistent with legitimate business planning or criminal activity? They were clearly discussions of money laundering coordination. The language, the payment structures, and the documentation avoidance were all consistent with criminal financial activity. After 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Victoria was convicted of money laundering, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, and racketeering. The evidence had been overwhelming, and Trevor's cooperation had corroborated every aspect of my testimony. Victoria's reaction to the verdict was a performance of shock and betrayal that might have been convincing if the jury hadn't just heard 3 days of evidence documenting her criminal activity. She sobbed as the verdicts were read, reached toward our parents as if seeking comfort, and maintained the facade of innocence even as the judge scheduled her sentencing hearing. Our parents' reaction was exactly what I'd expected. They continued to blame me for Victoria's conviction rather than acknowledging her criminal behavior. As we left the courthouse, our mother approached me with tears in her eyes and anger in her voice. "I hope you're satisfied," she said. "You've destroyed your sister's life and torn our family apart. I don't know how you can live with yourself. I can live with myself because I stopped ongoing criminal activities that were using our family as cover," I replied. Victoria made her choices, and now she's facing the consequence. Her choices? Her choice was to try to help you have a beautiful wedding, and you repaid her by sending her to prison. Our mother genuinely believed that Victoria's criminal activities had been motivated by desire to help family members rather than greed and criminal ambition. She'd constructed a narrative where Victoria was the victim, and I was the vindictive family member who'd destroyed an innocent person's future. Our father's approach was more direct. "You're no longer welcome in our home. As far as your mother and I are concerned, we have one daughter, and she's the one facing sentencing because of your betrayal. No longer welcome in our home." Our parents were disowning me for cooperating with law enforcement rather than supporting Victoria's criminal activity. They'd chosen to protect their criminal daughter rather than acknowledge their law-abiding daughter's appropriate response to illegal behavior. Victoria's sentencing hearing took place 6 weeks later. Federal guidelines called for a sentence of 8 to 12 years in prison, but her legal team argued for leniency based on her lack of prior criminal history and her role as a coordinator rather than the mastermind of the operation. Manning presented character witnesses who described Victoria as a generous family member and dedicated professional whose future had been destroyed by a single mistake in judgment. Our parents testified about Victoria's positive qualities and asked the judge to consider the impact of incarceration on their family. "Victoria has always been someone who puts family first," our mother told the judge. "She made errors in judgment, but her heart was always in the right place. Please don't destroy her future for mistakes that came from a desire to help others. Put family first." Our mother was describing Victoria's exploitation of family relationships as evidence of her devotion to family wealth. The prosecution's sentencing memorandum told a different story. documenting the scope of Victoria's criminal enterprise and her leadership role in money laundering operations that had processed millions of dollars in illegal proceeds. The defendant didn't make mistakes in judgment, Walsh argued. She made calculated decisions to build a criminal organization that exploited family relationships and social trust. Her activities caused financial harm to legitimate businesses and exposed innocent family members to criminal liability. Judge Patricia Coleman imposed a sentence of 10 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release and restitution of $3 million to victims of the money laundering operation. The sentence reflected the serious nature of Victoria's crimes and her leadership role in the criminal enterprise. Victoria's reaction to the sentence was another performance of shock and victimization. She addressed the court with a statement that maintained her innocence while expressing regret for the impact of the prosecution on our family. "Your Honor, I never intended to hurt anyone, especially my family. I'm devastated that my business activities have been mischaracterized as criminal behavior, and I'm heartbroken that family conflicts have escalated to this level. I hope someday the truth about these accusations will be understood. Never intended to hurt anyone." Victoria was maintaining her innocence even while being sentenced for criminal activities that had been documented through extensive evidence and testimony. As Victoria was led away to begin her prison sentence, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and vindication. Relief that her criminal enterprise had been dismantled and that she couldn't continue exploiting family relationships for illegal activities. Sadness that our family had been destroyed by her choices and our parents' decision to support her criminal behavior rather than acknowledge reality. Vindication that my cooperation with law enforcement had been justified and that justice had been served. The civil consequences of Victoria's criminal activities extended far beyond her prison sentence. Victims of the money laundering operation filed lawsuits against our family seeking damages for financial losses caused by their involvement in illegal transactions. Our parents' homeowners insurance didn't cover criminal liability, and they were forced to sell their house to pay legal fees and settlement costs. The Rodriguez family, despite their own criminal convictions, sued our family for damages related to their prosecution, arguing that Victoria's coordination of their money laundering activities had created legal liability they wouldn't have faced without family involvement. The lawsuit was eventually dismissed, but not before generating additional legal expenses and media coverage. Trevor received a sentence of 5 years in prison due to his cooperation with prosecutors, but he also faced civil liability from clients whose investments had been used for money laundering purposes. His cooperation had helped convict Victoria, but it hadn't protected him from the financial consequences of his criminal activities. The wedding vendors who'd been recruited into Victoria's money laundering operation faced tax investigations and business licensing review. Several vendors lost their licenses or were required to pay penalties for their participation in suspicious financial transactions, even though most had been manipulated rather than willingly participating in criminal activity. Sarah from Mountain Blooms contacted me 6 months after Victoria's sentencing to apologize for her role in the money laundering operation, and to thank me for exposing the criminal activities before they could spread further through the wedding industry. "I should have trusted my instincts when Victoria pressured me to accept unusual payment arrangements," Sarah said. "Your cooperation with law enforcement probably saved my business from much worse consequences." My cooperation with law enforcement. Sarah understood that my decision to document Victoria's criminal activities had protected vendors from ongoing exploitation and potential criminal liability. A year after Victoria's conviction, Dylan and I received an unexpected visitor, Agent Chen, who stopped by our apartment to provide an update on the broader investigation that had grown out of Victoria's case. "Your sister's money laundering operation was connected to a much larger criminal network," Agent Chen explained. "The evidence you provided helped us identify and prosecute 12 additional defendants involved in similar operations across 3 states. 12 additional defendants. Victoria's criminal enterprise had been part of a multi-state money laundering network that used family events and social connections to move illegal funds through legitimate businesses. The wedding industry has been particularly vulnerable to this type of exploitation because it involves large cash transactions, irregular payment schedules,
and family relationships that provide cover for unusual financial arrangements. Your cooperation helped us understand how these operations function and develop better detection methods. My documentation of Victoria's criminal activities had contributed to law enforcement's understanding of how money laundering operations exploit family relationships and social trust. Agent Chen also informed us that Victoria had been attempting to coordinate ongoing criminal activities from prison, using family visits and legal communications to maintain contact with former clients and vendors. Her prison communications were being monitored, and additional charges were being considered for continued criminal conspiracy. Some people don't learn from consequences, Agent Chen observed. Your sister seems determined to continue criminal activities, regardless of her legal situation. Victoria was still trying to coordinate money laundering operations from federal prison, demonstrating that her criminal behavior hadn't been a temporary mistake in judgment, but a fundamental aspect of her character. 2 years after Victoria's conviction, Dylan and I attended a conference on financial crimes prevention, where I was invited to speak about family member involvement in money laundering investigation. My presentation focused on the challenges faced by family members who discover criminal activities, and the importance of law enforcement cooperation in protecting innocent relatives from criminal liability. Criminal enterprises often exploit family relationships because they provide credibility and cover that strangers can't offer, I told the conference audience. Family members who discover criminal activities face difficult choices, but cooperation with law enforcement is often the only way to protect both victims and innocent family members from ongoing harm. During the question and answer session, a woman approached the microphone and identified herself as someone whose sister had been involved in similar criminal activities. How did you handle the family pressure to protect your sister rather than cooperate with law enforcement? She asked. I had to accept that protecting my sister from consequences wasn't the same as protecting my family from harm, I replied. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a family member is to stop enabling their criminal behavior, even if they never understand or forgive your decision. Stop enabling criminal behavior. I'd learned that family loyalty didn't require supporting criminal activities, or allowing family relationships to be exploited for illegal purposes. After the conference, Dylan and I drove through the mountains of western North Carolina, passing near Asheville and the venue where our wedding had taken place 3 years earlier. Mountain View Estate was still operating, still hosting celebrations for couples who had no idea that the beautiful stone buildings had once been the site of a federal money laundering investigation. Do you ever regret it? Dylan asked as we drove past the exit for the estate. Cooperating with the FBI, testifying against Victoria, everything that came after. I considered his question seriously. Did I regret the destruction of our family relationships? Did I regret the media coverage and legal proceedings that had dominated 2 years of our lives? Did I regret the knowledge that my sister was serving a 10-year federal prison sentence based partly on evidence I'd provided? I regret that Victoria made choices that required me to choose between family loyalty and legal cooperation, I said finally. But I don't regret stopping her from continuing to exploit our family and other families for criminal activities. What about your parents? Do you think they'll ever understand why you did what you did? Our parents had maintained their position that I'd destroyed Victoria's future out of jealousy and vindictiveness. They'd never acknowledged that Victoria had committed serious crimes or that my cooperation with law enforcement had been necessary to prevent ongoing criminal activity. Christmas cards stopped coming, birthday calls ended, and family gatherings became events we learned about through social media rather than invitations. I don't think they want to understand, I replied. Understanding would require acknowledging that they enabled Victoria's behavior for years and that their support helped provide credibility for criminal activities. It's easier for them to blame me than to accept responsibility for their role in creating the situation. That's their loss, Dylan said simply. He was right. Our parents had chosen to support a daughter who'd used their family for criminal purposes rather than acknowledge a daughter who'd acted with integrity to stop ongoing illegal activity. Their choice had cost them relationships with grandchildren they would never meet, holidays they would never share, and a future built on truth rather than denial. 3 years after our wedding, Dylan and I renewed our vows in a small ceremony at a vineyard in Virginia. We invited only friends who'd supported us through the investigation and trial, people who understood that choosing justice over family loyalty had been the right decision even when it was the difficult one. The flowers were white roses and eucalyptus, exactly what we'd originally planned for our wedding. The photographer captured genuine moments of joy rather than coordinated poses. The payment arrangements were simple and transparent, with no cash transactions or unusual coordination requirements. As we exchanged rings for the second time, I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years earlier, sitting in the blue room at Mountain View Estate, and making the decision to call Agent Chen. That decision had cost me my relationship with my parents and sister, but it had also protected countless other families from being exploited the way Victoria had exploited ours. I promised to choose truth over comfort, I said during our vow renewal ceremony, and justice over convenience, even when those choices require sacrifice.
Dylan smiled and replied, "I promise to stand beside you when you make difficult choices, especially when those choices protect others from harm." After the ceremony, we received a letter from Sarah at Mountain Blooms, who'd rebuilt her business with stricter financial protocols and better detection methods for unusual payment requests. "Thank you for having the courage to expose criminal activities that were harming our industry," Sarah wrote. "Your decision to cooperate with law enforcement helped protect legitimate vendors from ongoing exploitation and made the wedding industry safer for everyone." Made the wedding industry safer. My cooperation with law enforcement had contributed to better detection methods, stronger financial protocols, and increased awareness of how criminal enterprises exploit family relationships and social trust. 4 years after Victoria's conviction, I received a call from a victim's rights advocate, informing me that Victoria was eligible for early release based on good behavior and participation in prison rehabilitation programs. Her legal team was arguing that she'd learned from her mistakes and posed no threat to public safety. "The parole board will consider input from victims and family members who were affected by her criminal activities," the advocate explained. "If you want to provide a statement about the impact of her crimes, you have that opportunity. Provide a statement about the impact of her crime." I could tell the parole board about the destruction of our family relationships, the financial costs imposed on innocent vendors, the legal liability created for family members who'd been unknowingly involved in criminal activity. But I could also tell them about the positive outcomes that had resulted from Victoria's prosecution, the dismantling of a multi-state money laundering network, the development of better detection methods for financial crimes, the protection of other families from criminal exploitation. "I'll provide a statement," I told the advocate, "but it won't be what anyone expects." My statement to the parole board focused on redemption and rehabilitation rather than punishment and revenge. I described the growth I'd experienced through the process of choosing justice over family loyalty, the strength I'd found in making difficult decisions, and the peace that came from knowing I'd protected others from harm. "Victoria's crimes caused significant damage to our family and to innocent victims," I wrote. "They also created opportunities for growth, education, and prevention that have benefited many people. If Victoria has genuinely learned from her mistakes and committed to legal behavior, then early release might provide her with opportunities to contribute positively to society." Contribute positively to society. Victoria's criminal activities had taught law enforcement, financial institutions, and families about the importance of recognizing and preventing exploitation of trust relationships for illegal purposes. Victoria was released from federal prison after serving 6 years of her 10-year sentence. According to news reports, she moved to a different state and found employment with a nonprofit organization that provided financial education to low-income families. Her social media presence disappeared, and she made no public statements about her conviction or imprisonment. I never heard from her directly, but I occasionally received updates from mutual acquaintances who mentioned seeing her at community events or volunteer activity. She appeared to be building a quiet life focused on legitimate work and social contribution rather than criminal enterprises and family exploitation. "Do you think she's really changed?" Dylan asked when I shared one of these updates. "I think she learned that using family relationships for criminal purposes has consequences," I replied. "Whether that translates to genuine rehabilitation or just better criminal planning, I don't know, but it's not my responsibility to monitor her choices anymore. Not my responsibility. I'd done what was necessary to stop Victoria's criminal activities and protect other families from exploitation. Her future behavior was her responsibility, and the consequences of any future criminal choices would be hers to face. 5 years after our original wedding, Dylan and I celebrated our anniversary by visiting mountain overlooks near Asheville and reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. We'd built a marriage based on honesty, integrity, and mutual support through difficult decisions. We'd learned that sometimes love requires choosing justice over loyalty, truth over comfort, and protection of others over family expectations. Any regrets? Dylan asked as we watched the sunset over the Blue Ridge Mountain. Only that it took a criminal investigation for me to understand who Victoria really was, I said. But not regrets about the choices I made once I understood. She gave you the opportunity to discover who you really are too. He was right. Victoria's criminal activities had revealed my capacity for courage, integrity, and protection of others, even when those choices required personal sacrifice. Her attempts to exploit our family had ultimately demonstrated the strength of character that comes from choosing what's right over what's easy. As we drove home through the mountains, I thought about all the families who'd been protected by Victoria's prosecution, all the vendors who'd been saved from ongoing criminal exploitation, and all the law enforcement officers who'd gained better understanding of how criminal enterprises operate. Victoria had tried to use our wedding as the foundation for a criminal empire. Instead, she'd provided the evidence necessary to dismantle a multi-state money laundering network and protect countless other families from similar exploitation. Sometimes the most destructive people in our lives create the greatest opportunities for growth, courage, and positive impact. Victoria had intended to destroy my wedding day, but she'd actually given me the chance to discover strength I never knew I possessed. That strength had cost me a relationship with my parents and sister, but it had gained me a marriage built on integrity, a career dedicated to protecting others from financial crimes, and the peace that comes from knowing I'd chosen justice over convenience when it mattered most. 5 years later, Dylan and I were still married, still committed to choosing truth over comfort, and still grateful for the difficult lessons that had shaped us into people we could respect. Victoria was free to build whatever life she chose, but she could never again use our family as cover for criminal activities. That protection alone made every difficult choice worthwhile. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.